Sarah and Mark's love story had once been the stuff of fairy tales. They met during their sophomore year at college, bonding over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of traveling the world together. From the moment they started dating, it was clear to everyone around them that they were meant to be. Their connection was magnetic, full of laughter, deep conversations, and an unshakable sense of partnership. After graduation, they got married in a small ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Life seemed perfect. For years, Sarah and Mark built a life filled with joy and purpose. They bought a cozy home in the suburbs, adopted a playful golden retriever named Max, and talked endlessly about starting a family. But fate is unpredictable, and one rainy evening, everything changed. On her way back from work, Sarah's car skidded on a wet road and crashed into a guardrail. The accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. It was devastating, not just for Sarah, but also for Mark, who struggled to come to terms with the sudden shift in their lives. At first, Mark was incredibly supportive. He spent hours researching treatments, attending therapy sessions with Sarah, and learning how to help her adjust to her new reality. Friends often praised him for being such a devoted husband. For a while, Sarah believed they could overcome anything as long as they had each other. She worked hard to regain independence, even enrolling in art classes to channel her emotions into painting. Despite the challenges, there were moments when happiness still flickered between them. A quiet dinner at home, a walk in the park with Max, or simply holding hands while watching TV. But as months turned into years, cracks began to form in their relationship. Mark grew increasingly distant, consumed by frustration and feelings of helplessness. He resented the fact that their life wasn't what he had envisioned anymore. While Sarah tried her best to stay positive, Mark found himself withdrawing emotionally. He stopped talking about their future plans and avoided spending time at home, claiming work kept him busy. What started as occasional arguments escalated into bitter silences that lingered for days. Sarah noticed the change but chose to believe it was temporary. She convinced herself that Mark needed time to process everything, and that eventually, they'd find their way back to each other. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the growing emptiness in their marriage. Meanwhile, Mark became more detached, finding solace in distractions outside their home. Little did Sarah know, his absences weren't just about avoiding their struggles. They signaled the beginning of something far worse. As the distance between them widened, neither realized how fragile their bond had become. What had once been a foundation of trust and love now felt like shifting sand beneath their feet. And though Sarah clung to hope, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was pulling Mark further away. Unbeknownst to her, a storm was brewing, threatening to shatter not only their marriage but also the life they had fought so hard to rebuild after the accident. Mark's growing dissatisfaction with his life at home led him to spend more and more time at work. At first, it seemed like a harmless way to cope with the stress of Sarah's condition. But as the days turned into weeks, his presence at the office became less about productivity and more about escaping the emotional weight he felt at home. It was during these long hours that he met Emily, a bright, ambitious woman who worked in the marketing department. Emily was everything Mark thought he wanted: confident, energetic, and full of life. She had a contagious laugh and an ability to make even the dullest meetings feel exciting. Unlike Sarah, whose world now revolved around managing her physical limitations, Emily lived a fast-paced, carefree existence. To Mark, she represented freedom, the kind of life he believed he'd lost after Sarah's accident. He found himself drawn to her effortlessly, seeking her company whenever possible. Their friendship quickly deepened into something more. What started as casual conversations over coffee turned into private lunches and late-night phone calls. Emily admired Mark's drive and ambition, while he relished the attention and validation she gave him. For the first time in years, he felt seen and appreciated, not as a caregiver or husband burdened by responsibility, but as a man capable of passion and excitement. The guilt gnawed at him occasionally, but he pushed those thoughts aside, convincing himself that Sarah would never truly understand his needs. Then came the bombshell. Emily revealed she was pregnant. At first, Mark was overwhelmed by panic. A baby meant permanence, commitment, things he hadn't considered when he allowed himself to drift into this affair. But as Emily spoke about their future together, a strange sense of exhilaration washed over him. Here was a chance to start fresh, to build the family he'd always dreamed of without the complications that defined his life with Sarah. In his mind, leaving Sarah wasn't just an option, it became inevitable. However, Mark knew breaking the news wouldn't be easy. Sarah's paralysis already made her vulnerable, and ending their marriage under any circumstances would hurt her deeply. Yet instead of approaching the situation with honesty and compassion, Mark let bitterness take over. He convinced himself that Sarah no longer deserved his loyalty, not because she had done anything wrong, but because her condition had ruined their life together. His resentment blinded him to the sacrifices she had made and the strength she showed every day just to keep moving forward. With each passing day, Mark grew colder toward Sarah. He stopped pretending to care about her well-being, brushing off her attempts to reconnect or share moments from her art classes. Instead, he spent most of his time planning his exit strategy. He imagined how freeing it would be to walk away from the life they had built and step into a new chapter with Emily. What he didn't realize was that his actions weren't just hurting Sarah. They were setting the stage for a confrontation that would expose far more than his betrayal. Unbeknownst to him, secrets from his past were lurking in the shadows, waiting to unravel not only his plans, but also the fragile image of himself he had carefully constructed. The charity gala was supposed to be a night of celebration, a chance for the community to come together and support a cause close to Sarah's heart. She had spent weeks preparing for the event, determined to show everyone that her spirit remained unbroken despite the challenges she faced. Dressed in an elegant navy blue gown with her hair styled neatly and a warm smile on her face, Sarah arrived at the venue ready to inspire. Mark, however, had other plans. As the evening unfolded, guests mingled over hors d'oeuvres and soft jazz music filled the room. The atmosphere was lively, filled with laughter and chatter. When it came time for speeches, the host announced Mark as one of the speakers, citing his dedication to overcoming adversity alongside Sarah. The audience clapped politely as he stepped onto the stage, adjusting the microphone to his height. For a moment, everything seemed normal, until Mark began to speak. Instead of sharing words of encouragement or gratitude, Mark launched into a cruel monologue that left the room stunned. He spoke about how Sarah's accident had stolen their future, painting her paralysis as a burden too heavy for him to bear. His tone dripped with bitterness as he declared that she could no longer fulfill her role as a wife or mother. Then, without hesitation, he revealed his affair with Emily and announced that she was pregnant with his child. "I deserve a second chance," Mark said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "A real family, and I'm taking it." The room fell deathly quiet. Guests exchanged horrified glances, unsure whether they were witnessing a personal meltdown or a calculated act of cruelty. Sarah sat frozen in her wheelchair, her hands gripping the armrests tightly. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. Her mind raced with disbelief. How could the man who once promised to stand by her side turn into someone so callous? For a few unbearable seconds, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then whispers erupted like wildfire, spreading across tables as people struggled to process what they had just heard. Some looked away, unable to meet Sarah's gaze, while others stared openly, their expressions a mix of pity and anger. Friends and family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, torn between rushing to Sarah's side and maintaining decorum. Mark stood tall on the stage, oblivious to the chaos he had unleashed. To him, this was liberation, a public declaration, freeing him from the life he resented. But as he scanned the crowd, searching for approval or understanding, all he found were faces etched with shock and disapproval. Even Emily, seated near the back of the room, appeared uneasy, fidgeting with her clutch as if regretting her decision to attend. Finally, the MC awkwardly took the microphone from Mark, thanking him for his candid remarks, before moving on to the next speaker. As the program continued, Sarah remained composed, though inside she felt shattered. Yet amidst the pain, a spark of determination ignited within her. If Mark thought he could break her spirit, he was wrong. This humiliating moment would not define her. It would fuel her resolve to rise above the ashes of their marriage and reclaim her life on her own terms. That night, after the gala, Sarah returned home feeling emotionally drained but strangely determined. The betrayal still stung deeply, but something inside her had shifted during those silent moments on the stage. Instead of crumbling under Mark's cruel words, she felt a quiet strength rising within her, a refusal to let him strip away her dignity. As she wheeled herself into their bedroom, she began packing her belongings, not out of despair but with purpose. The house they had once shared now felt foreign, like a place where love had been replaced by lies and resentment. Each item she packed carried memories, some painful, others bittersweet, but none of them tied her to Mark anymore. She moved methodically, folding clothes, sorting through photo albums, and boxing up trinkets that once symbolized their life together. It wasn't just about leaving him, it was about reclaiming herself. As dawn broke, Sarah found herself in Mark's study, a room she rarely entered. Drawers lined the walls, filled with papers, receipts, and old documents. Something compelled her to look closer. Maybe it was curiosity or perhaps an instinct she couldn't explain. Either way, as she sifted through the clutter, her fingers brushed against a dusty manila envelope tucked away at the back of a drawer. Its edges were worn, suggesting it had been hidden there for years. Opening it carefully, Sarah discovered a stack of letters and official-looking documents. At first glance, they seemed unrelated: medical bills, handwritten notes, and faded photographs. But as she read further, her heart began to race. The letters revealed conversations between Mark and someone named Lisa, dated nearly 2 decades ago. They spoke of a child, a boy named Liam, who was born shortly before Mark and Sarah got married. According to the documents, Mark was Liam's father. Sarah's hands trembled as she pieced everything together. There were court orders demanding child support payments, letters from Lisa pleading for financial help, and even a school photograph of a young boy who bore an uncanny resemblance to Mark. Yet none of this had ever come up during their marriage. Mark had kept this secret buried, pretending to be the devoted husband while neglecting another family entirely. For a moment, Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she had uncovered. This wasn't just another betrayal. It was proof of a pattern. Mark had abandoned his responsibilities long before he met Sarah, and now history was repeating itself. He had left Lisa and Liam without a second thought, just as he planned to leave her. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Mark didn't value loyalty or commitment. His actions weren't personal. They were simply who he was. But instead of letting anger consume her, Sarah felt clarity wash over her. She realized that exposing these secrets could change everything, not just for her but for Liam and Lisa too. With renewed determination, she gathered the documents and reached out to her closest friend, Rachel, who happened to be a lawyer. Together, they began drafting a plan to hold Mark accountable, not just for his betrayal of Sarah, but for the years of neglect he had inflicted on his son. By the time morning light streamed through the windows, Sarah knew exactly what she needed to do. This wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about standing up for herself and others who had been hurt by Mark's selfishness. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, ready to take control of her future and ensure that Mark faced the consequences of his actions. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Sarah was no longer afraid. The next few days were a whirlwind for Sarah, as she worked tirelessly to piece together the story hidden within the documents she had uncovered. With Rachel's guidance, she reached out to Lisa, the woman mentioned in the letters. It took several attempts before Lisa finally agreed to meet. When they spoke over the phone, Sarah could hear the weariness in Lisa's voice, a mix of caution and curiosity about why someone from Mark's past was reaching out after so many years. They met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Far from prying eyes, Lisa arrived with a guarded expression, clutching a worn purse tightly against her chest. She was older now, with streaks of gray in her hair and lines etched into her face that hinted at years of struggle. As Sarah introduced herself and explained What she had discovered, Lisa's defenses slowly began to crumble. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope that justice might finally catch up with Mark. Lisa recounted how Mark had disappeared from their lives shortly after Liam's birth, leaving her to raise their son alone. He had promised to help, financially, but stopped responding to her calls and ignored court orders demanding child support. Over the years, Lisa had taken on multiple jobs just to make ends meet, often going without so Liam could have a stable life. Despite everything, she never remarried or sought another partner, focusing all her energy on being both mother and father to their boy. Sarah listened intently, her heart breaking for Lisa and Liam. What struck her most was how much they had endured, not just financially but emotionally. Mark's absence had left a void in Liam's life, one that no amount of money could ever fill. Yet despite the pain, there was resilience in Lisa's words. She spoke proudly of Liam, now a teenager excelling in school and sports, determined to build a future brighter than his past. Armed with this new information, Sarah and Rachel devised a plan to expose Mark's history of neglect. They filed legal petitions not only for divorce but also to reopen the case regarding Liam's unpaid child support. The media soon caught wind of the story, thanks to an anonymous tip, likely from Rachel. Journalists began digging into Mark's background, uncovering inconsistencies in his public persona and private actions. Within days, headlines blared across local news outlets. Prominent businessman accused of abandoning son for decades. As the scandal unfolded, Mark found himself cornered. Friends and colleagues who once admired him now questioned his character. His carefully crafted image as a devoted husband and ambitious professional crumbled under the weight of these revelations. Even Emily distanced herself, horrified by the extent of his deceit. For the first time, Mark faced consequences not just for betraying Sarah, but for abandoning his responsibilities as a father. Meanwhile, Sarah felt a profound sense of relief. Exposing Mark's secrets wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability. She wanted him to understand the ripple effects of his choices and take responsibility for the lives he had damaged along the way. More importantly, she hoped this would bring closure to Lisa and Liam, giving them the recognition and support they deserved. By the end of the week, Sarah received an unexpected call from Liam himself. Though hesitant at first, he thanked her for standing up for him and his mom. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly, "but I'm glad you did." Those words stayed with Sarah long after they hung up, reminding her that sometimes courage isn't just about standing up for yourself. It's about lifting others too. The fallout from the scandal hit Mark like a tidal wave, sweeping away everything he had worked so hard to build. What started as whispers in the office quickly escalated into full-blown headlines that dominated local news outlets. Reporters camped outside his workplace and home, eager to capture every detail of his unraveling life. Friends who once praised him now avoided eye contact, while colleagues distanced themselves, fearing guilt by association. For the first time, Mark was forced to confront the consequences of his actions, and they were devastating. At work, things went from bad to worse. His company, keen to protect its reputation, placed him on indefinite leave pending an internal investigation. Clients canceled meetings, citing concerns about associating with controversy. The ambitious career Mark had spent years building crumbled before his eyes. He tried to defend himself, insisting that people didn't understand the complexity of his situation, but no one listened. The public saw only a man who had abandoned not one family but two, a husband who humiliated his disabled wife, and a father who neglected his son. Emily, too, began pulling away. At first, she stood by him, believing their love could weather the storm. But as more details emerged about Liam and Lisa, her resolve wavered. She couldn't reconcile the man she thought she knew with the selfish, reckless figure portrayed in the media. When reporters approached her for comment, she broke down, admitting she felt betrayed not just by Mark, but also by her own naivety. Within days, she moved out of their shared apartment, leaving behind a note that simply read, "I can't do this anymore." As his world collapsed around him, Mark became increasingly isolated. Once surrounded by admirers and allies, he now found himself alone, grappling with the wreckage of his choices. Nights were the hardest. Sleep eluded him as memories of Sarah's tear-streaked face haunted his thoughts. He replayed the gala speech over and over in his mind, cringing at how cruel and calculated he had sounded. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the pain he had caused, not just Sarah but Lisa, Liam, Emily, and even himself. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to rise above it all. With the divorce finalized and a substantial settlement secured, she focused on rebuilding her life. She sold the suburban house they had once shared and moved into a cozy apartment downtown, closer to her art studio. Surrounded by vibrant paintings and the hum of city life, she embraced her newfound independence. Her foundation for women facing adversity gained traction, drawing support from donors and volunteers alike. Through workshops and mentorship programs, Sarah inspired others to find strength in their struggles, sharing her story without bitterness or regret. Mark watched from afar as Sarah thrived, tormented by the realization that he had underestimated her resilience. Every interview she gave, every smile she shared in photos, felt like a silent rebuke to his failures. Yet what hurt most was seeing Liam step forward. Encouraged by Lisa and supported by Sarah, Liam decided to meet Mark face to face. The encounter was brief but poignant. Sitting across from his teenage son for the first time, Mark struggled to find words. Liam's piercing gaze held no anger, only disappointment and quiet determination to succeed despite his father's absence. By the end of the month, Mark had lost nearly everything: his job, his mistress, his reputation, and any chance of redemption with his children. As he sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, scrolling through old photos of happier times, he realized the depth of his mistakes. Karma, it seemed, had come full circle, delivering a punishment far harsher than anything he could have imagined. And though he wanted to blame everyone else, the media, Sarah, fate, he knew deep down that he had brought this upon himself. Months passed, and Sarah's life transformed in ways she never imagined. The settlement money from the divorce became more than just financial security. It was a tool for reinvention. She poured her energy into expanding her foundation, naming it Rise Together, a tribute to her journey of resilience and empowerment. The organization quickly gained national attention, offering resources and support to women navigating challenges similar to hers. Art therapy workshops, counseling sessions, and career development programs became its hallmark initiatives, touching countless lives. Sarah also found joy in mentoring young artists, many of whom were struggling to find their voice. Her own artwork evolved during this time, shifting from introspective pieces about pain and loss to vibrant creations celebrating hope and renewal. One painting, titled Wings of Courage, depicted a bird breaking free from its cage, a metaphor for her liberation from Mark's shadow. It resonated deeply with viewers and eventually won an award at a local art exhibition. For Sarah, the recognition wasn't about fame. It was proof that she had reclaimed her identity on her own terms. Meanwhile, her bond with Liam grew stronger. Though they weren't related by blood, Sarah felt a maternal connection to him, seeing echoes of her own struggles in his story. They spent weekends together exploring museums, attending sports events, or simply talking over coffee. Liam opened up to her about the loneliness of growing up without a father, and how he channeled that emptiness into excelling at school and athletics. Sarah listened intently, offering advice when asked, but mostly providing the unconditional support he had always craved. Lisa, too, became part of Sarah's extended family. Their shared experiences created a unique sisterhood, built on mutual respect and understanding. Lisa often joked that Sarah had given her a second chance at closure, finally allowing her to let go of years of bitterness toward Mark. Together, the three of them formed an unlikely trio, united not by blood, but by the scars left behind by one man's selfishness. As for Mark, his descent continued unabated. Stripped of his job, relationships, and dignity, he drifted through life aimlessly. He took odd jobs to make ends meet, living in a modest apartment far removed from the upscale lifestyle he once enjoyed. The media occasionally revisited his story, reminding the public of his transgressions while whispers of his downfall followed him wherever he went. Friends who remained loyal initially eventually distanced themselves, unable to reconcile the person they knew with the man exposed in headlines. Yet despite everything, Mark couldn't bring himself to apologize, not publicly at least. Privately, he wrote letters to Sarah, Lisa, and Liam, expressing regret for his actions, but none of them reached their intended recipients. Rachel intercepted them, convinced they were hollow attempts to ease his conscience rather than genuine acts of remorse. Words mean nothing unless backed by action, she told Sarah firmly. And so the letters stayed locked away, unread and unanswered. Through it all, Sarah focused on creating a future defined not by anger or revenge, but by purpose and compassion. She began speaking at conferences and community events, sharing her story with raw honesty and inspiring others to rise above adversity. Her speeches always ended with the same message. We can't control what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond. Pain doesn't define us. Our courage does. By the end of the year, Sarah stood taller than ever before, no longer weighed down by the past. She had turned tragedy into triumph, betrayal into opportunity, and heartbreak into healing. As she looked around at the people she had touched, Liam, Lisa, the women in her foundation, she realized something profound. Sometimes, the greatest victories come not from defeating others, but from rising above ourselves. Years had passed, since the night Mark's betrayal shattered their lives, but Sarah stood on stage now as a symbol of resilience and hope. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of attendees took their seats, eager to hear her speak. Among them sat Liam, now a young man nearing graduation, his confidence radiating as he chatted animatedly with Lisa. Beside them were friends, volunteers from her foundation, and even strangers who had been inspired by her journey. For Sarah, this moment was more than just another speech. It was closure. As she rolled onto the stage in her wheelchair, applause erupted throughout the room. She smiled warmly, taking in the sea of faces before her. Her voice carried strength and calmness as she began to share her story, not just the pain of Mark's betrayal or the struggles following her accident, but the lessons she had learned along the way. Life doesn't always give us justice, she said, pausing briefly to let her words sink in. But it does offer us choices. Choose kindness, choose honesty, and above all, choose yourself. The audience hung on every word, moved by her vulnerability and wisdom. She spoke about how forgiveness wasn't about excusing someone's actions. It was about freeing yourself from the weight of bitterness. She recounted how discovering Mark's secret about Liam could have consumed her with anger. But instead, she chose to channel that energy into helping others. Sometimes, she added with a soft laugh, the best revenge isn't hatred, it's happiness. Her eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Liam. She gestured toward him, inviting him to join her on stage. A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience as he stood up, visibly nervous but proud. When he reached her side, Sarah introduced him as a remarkable young man who taught me the true meaning of courage. Together, they shared snippets of their unlikely bond, how they had found each other amidst chaos and built a relationship rooted in trust and understanding. It was clear to everyone watching that their connection was genuine, born out of mutual respect rather than obligation. Mark, meanwhile, remained on the fringes of society, haunted by the life he had destroyed. He attended the event incognito, slipping into the back row unnoticed. As he watched Sarah and Liam embrace on stage, something inside him shifted. For years he had clung to denial, blaming circumstances beyond his control for his downfall. But seeing Sarah's grace and Liam's quiet strength forced him to confront the truth. He had failed, not because of bad luck, but because of poor choices. When the Q&A session began, one attendee asked Sarah if she ever regretted exposing Mark's secrets. Without hesitation, she shook her head. Regret is a heavy burden, she replied. What I did wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. Sometimes, we need to shine a light on the darkest corners of our lives to truly heal. By the time the event ended, The room buzzed with inspiration. People lined up to thank Sarah, sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph. Mark lingered near the exit, torn between leaving and approaching her. In the end, he chose the former, disappearing into the crowd like a ghost. Though he would never fully redeem himself, witnessing Sarah's transformation planted a seed of reflection within him, a reminder that while some wounds may never fully heal, change is still possible. That evening, as Sarah sat with Liam and Lisa at a cozy restaurant celebrating the day's success, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had reclaimed her life, turned pain into purpose, and forged connections stronger than blood. And though Mark's shadow still lingered in the past, it no longer defined her future. As she raised her glass in a toast, she whispered, "To new beginnings, for all of us."